wanted to also talk about the five good things, and you named them before, you referenced them before, but I think it's such a point of entree for a lot of people into RCT. So I wonder if, does that ring true for you? Do you feel like that's something that a lot of people get drawn to early in their?
Yeah, I mean, it's clear, it's simple, it's not overly ambitious. It's a good measuring. You know, people often will say, "Well, how can I tell if a relationship is good or not?" And you know, it's not that the five good things is an absolute measure of what's a good relationship, but it does give you a clue of what happens in a growth fostering relationship. It's you know, and it's also and a good set of outcome variables for people who are interested in doing research. I mean, it's sort of like, okay, here, if this is a growth fostering relationship or a mutually beneficial relationship, here are the things that you're likely to see. And then and I think that first one of genes was just brilliant. I mean, Zest. How often have you read a psychology journal article or educational article that talks about Zest? Never. But Zest, I mean, Zest, so it has that freshness and that sense of aliveness. And as I think of the five good things, I often think of the opposite of the five good things, which of course is what presents to people in therapy. And you know, it's sort of like it's a sense of deadness, a confusion, low self-worth, not wanting to reach out to other people, wanting to isolate. So I think it's a good entry, partly because it isn't pretentious. It isn't. It's true. It rings true. When people hear it, they say, "Oh yeah, you know, I love it when we get together and we talk and we get so excited that we finish each other's sentences and look at this, we're creating this new chapter together or something." You know, I think it hits home. And
Mhm.
that's what I'd say in general about Jean's work. I mean, she was so careful and so she did not want to obfuscate. She did not. I mean, a lot of psychological theory. I don't know about educational theory so much, but a lot of psychological theory is so obfuscating and fancy and so this was just kind of okay. This is kind of simple and plain and true.
Mhm.
And yeah.
Okay. Um, yeah, I think it's really accessible language, and I think that,
Yeah, exactly. That's the word. Yep.
yeah. Um, so let's, so the five good things we understand are both the sort of elements or what's sort of going on in growth fostering relationships and also outcomes, right? So you
Yeah.
said that. So let's talk about each one. So you talked a little bit about Zest. Um, Tell me more about that. Like, how did that idea even emerge in the conversation? Do you remember when you all started talking about Zest and
No, I don't remember. I mean, I think it was Jean actually was writing a paper. I'm not sure if it was Connections and Disconnections. It was an early paper. And for whatever reason, I think she came up with this. I mean, we did a lot of things together where we didn't know who came up with what in terms of ideas. And that was mostly fun and sometimes painful. But but I think Jean kind of came up with this on her own, the five good things.
Okay.
And I think it had the resonance with the rest of us that we kind of said, oh yeah, that catches it.
Mhm.
So I think that that's what I would say about this. And the zest part, as I said, was such an unusual word, and that was pure Jean. I mean, it was a very apt word
Mhm.
and a very apt feeling state that she was describing.
Yeah, I imagine you all were experiencing a lot of zest when you were doing the work.
We did. We had a lot of exciting times together, just, talking and sharing thoughts and feeling hopeful about how this work might be useful in the world. And yeah, there was a lot of zest in that group and a lot of laughter too. Nobody talks about the laughter, but we did. Jean had a great laugh, and we would laugh a lot. and
Mhm.
complain a lot about the culture and the worlds we were working in. But
Yeah. Okay. So Zest, sense of worth. Say more about that. How do you see that from through an RCT lens?
well, I think when you're in good relationship, you do feel worthwhile. You do feel more worthwhile. I mean, I think we were trying to get away from the self-esteem language, because it's always felt to me like that language is a little hierarchical. Like my self-esteem is better than yours, or this or that. So I thought, the idea of worth and a sense of worth and being valued, clearly, I think arises largely in relationship. Obviously, we feel good when we do something intellectual that feels satisfying, or we accomplish a task that we wanted to do. So I think there are different pathways to that sense of worth, but I think a lot of it does come in relationship. And I think that if we look again at the neurochemistry, I mean, the dopamine is totally hooked up with relationship factors in the beginning. It gets unhooked, unfortunately, but in the beginning, it certainly is very. I mean, it is the dopamine hit, the dopamine sense of worth,
Mhm.
is very powerful in connection, and we now have the brain data that supports that.
Mhm. Yeah, I hadn't thought about it this way before, but I know we've talked about your preference to move away from the language of self-esteem, but as I'm thinking about it today, self-esteem does sound sort of like it's contained in the individual and it's up to
Yeah,
the individual to develop, whereas worth does, and maybe it's just the context of this conversation, but I feel like worth is sort of inherently more about self in relation.
I think
Worth maybe
so.
doesn't exist in isolation in the way that self-esteem might. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, I just think, I have this allergy to the language of self. So, I mean, self-esteem, self-interest, all of those things I question. I particularly question self-interest. It's sort of like that has been seen as the core motivator for most developmental theories. And I think self-interest is not a biological imperative. Self-interest is a social prescription. We think people who are self-interested are better than people who don't have as much self-interest. And I would say that, there's a kind of relational interest, which is very different. And so I mean, I think the self language, I mean, it's going to happen. We have a sense of ourselves. It's very well established, but I think we just need to be aware of it as what kind of metaphor is it? It's a spatial metaphor. It's a metaphor that's very defined by boundaries and separateness, and to really begin to get the metaphor more in the direction of relatedness. And I agree with you about the worth thing. It feels more relational. I'm not sure that's real. It may just be that's kind of what we've done to get away from self-esteem and the intrapsychic emphasis of sort of getting the problem defined as in the individual rather than in the context and the relationship between the individual and the context.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And self-esteem, I think in the way that it feels very contained within the self to me, has no regard for the impact of cultural context either, right?
Absolutely. I mean, interestingly, Yvonne Jenkins, who's worked with us, has talked about social esteem,
Mhm.
which I think is an interesting variation on self-esteem, and it's exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. Okay. Um, so, and then maybe a third good thing, and one of the things I want to say about I think we know about the five good things is even though we end up talking about them in linear fashion, because I guess that's all we have, that they're really all sort of
Yeah,
happening with each other and react like sort of building on each other and all of that, right? So
yeah,
it's not that they happen in order or something.
yeah.
But
Very good point.
another of the five good things I think of as clarity,
Mhm.
knowledge. Um, so say more about.
Clarity is I think, is really important. And I think it's a lot of what we work towards in therapy and actually in education as well. I mean, to get clearer. I mean, it's a little bit about mindfulness in a way. And I think mindfulness is in this model, even though it isn't expressly stated very often. But I think that a notion of getting clearer about yourself, about the world around you, um, and it's very relational. It's not I am clear. It's I in this context I have clarity about such and such. So yeah, I like the clarity one.
Yeah. Well, and I also think of it that I mean, they all go back to your point about in growth fostering relationships, we can bring more of ourself. We can bring increasingly more of ourself to the relationship. But the clarity element stands out for me in that way, because I think of it in terms of, so if a student comes in to see me and let's say they're confused about whether they want to stay in the program, or they are unsure about a topic for a paper, or I would think very much when a client comes into therapy that when they feel, so often we gain clarity just by me putting into words what I'm trying to
Hmm.
explain to you. I might get a little more clarity. And then if you're creating that space for me where I can bring more of myself and share
Uh-huh.
more deeply and take some risks, then I get increased clarity. And that
Mhm.
probably helps with the sense of worth and the zest,
Mhm. Yeah.
other pieces that we'll talk about. But it's that clarity happens so much in the back and forth. And it's really about, I sort of put an idea out there, and when you welcome it and you hold it and or you criticize it, but you do that with care, then
Mhm.
I can start to build that idea further
Yeah.
and get more clear on my research topic or my future plans or whatever.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think the other one that I find is kind of less noticed often is the last one of the five good things, which is the desire for more connection. And the reason I think that's so important is that this is not a model that says you get relationship and then you're done, you're finished, you just enjoy it. It's like if you have the experience of being in a growth fostering relationship, you actually will be seeking more connection, and that really makes it a kind of a community oriented model rather than a self oriented model. It's a sort of like it really supports building community and relationship out in the world. So that feels important to me to think about as well.
Okay. Yeah, and it's sort of like, I guess these growth fostering interactions, ideally they help us form, maybe adapt our ideas about relational images, right? They help us
Mhm.
make shifts in terms of how we think we'll be met in the world, and or how what we expect from certain kinds of people. So if we have a good interaction with a teacher or a coach,
Mhm.
then we might be more likely to seek out another teacher or coach, because we
Yes.
realize that all teachers aren't going to treat me the way a certain teacher did, or a certain
Yes.
set of
Yeah.
teachers did. Okay. And then the other of the five good things that we haven't talked about, I think, is movement or action, right?
Yes, that and it's funny because that one is there are a lot of different words that people have applied to it. The other ones are kind of standard, but I talked about creativity or productivity, and so but I think it's a really important one because I think so much of the message of our culture is real creativity and real productivity is the outcome of one individual doing something heroic or something special or something smart, and attribution is often to the one individual rather than there's a team that produced this. Or I mean, there's a very prevailing sense of going off by yourself and writing by yourself or figuring things out by yourself or painting by yourself, and the idea of the feedback and the back and forth gets lost. So I think that's a really important one, but it is interesting that we've all, I know Joyce Fletcher said recently to me, "Are we calling that creativity now? Or are we calling that productivity?" So, I get another point here is, of course, this is a work in progress.
Mhm.
I think whenever we start feeling like we've got it and we've got it nailed, we should pause and wonder because it is a work in progress and things shift. Um, yeah.
It also makes me wonder if that fourth good thing, maybe um, maybe it's a lot more robust than we have thought it is. In that, I mean, so when I think of it as movement, I often think of it as getting unstuck, and that with that clarity. So the student gets, clarity on a topic, on a research
Mm.
topic, or again, future plans or something like that. Or, I'm talking with a friend and I get sort of a little unstuck in the problem that I was talking about when I sat down. Um, so I often think of it as movement, but certainly creativity totally rings true for me in that it's, um, I think it is the sort of generative process of people working together and thinking together and bouncing ideas off each other, and, the ways that we can develop ideas in connection that I don't think I would certainly develop on my own.
Mhm.
Um, so movement, creativity, I think action, and you said there are a couple others. So it just seems like maybe there's a whole lot more in there than, I don't know, than I at least sometimes think of.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like it might be more multidimensional than the other four good things.
Yeah, and the other thing is you just see that I mean, I think the idea of action or movement is really important, and that is part of the growth fostering. Is sort of like, okay, we're not just static. We're moving, and we're moving in response to one another, and we're learning new things. We talk about the fact that one of the most powerful places of growth is with mutual empathy,
Mhm,
particularly across difference.
mhm,
So not as easy as mutual empathy across sameness or similarity.
mhm.
So the idea of moving across difference to do your greatest growth is really important piece of this as well.